That brings us to number 9 on our agenda, the superintendent's report.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board, and our community. We're certainly appreciative of the work of all those who submitted art to their teachers. It was certainly a hard decision, but very, very proud of our award winners tonight. As always, we're a system guided by 3 critical questions. Why do we do this work? How do we accomplish the why? And then what are our outcomes? Our why is our vision, that we love and grow our students. Our how is our mission, is that we're focused on academic, social, emotional growth and development. And then our what is our strategic plan outcomes. These are the 24 strategies that we have chasing 4 performance goals to ensure that every student feels loved in our schools and every student has demonstrated academic growth in our schools. As we set a strategic plan, so does the state of South Carolina. This summer, the State Department of Education has updated its strategic plan. By 2030, at least 75% of students will be at or above grade level. This is to ensure that students graduate college, career, or military ready. And so we work towards that goal. Our assessments, state assessments are coming out. We see growth in both end-of-course tests for biology and U.S. history, actually meeting the 75% mark in biology, but growth in all areas. As we look at the state assessments for SC Ready and the EOC, we can see for SC Ready ELA, English Language Arts, we had a decline there, slight decline of about 0.7%. But increases in math for SC Ready, Algebra 1 for SC Ready, and English 2. If you look at the high school end-of-course exams, we're excited to be over that 75% mark with 81% and 94%. So again, a huge testament to the great work of our teachers, our staff, and our students. So very, very proud of their work. And as we work with ELA, we have while that is a dip, it's still higher than the previous years. Our teachers are working hard as they work for the, whether it's Read to Succeed, the new state standards that we have in ELA, the new books that are coming out, and the letters training. I think Ms. McCaskill knows all too well the demands that are placed on our teachers for those trainings. We will have, after the college and career readiness and graduation date will be embargoed in October, and we'll present that data then. As we talked about the administrative priorities this year, classroom supports, it continues to be our #1 our goal of supporting our teachers. As we look at classrooms along the district, we need to understand that teachers are not getting this homogeneous reading level group. They're getting multiple bands of learning and understanding and reading grade levels within a classroom. And so when we look at the instructional materials, the instructional strategies, the methodologies, our teachers have to represent students below the 21st percentile all the way up to students who are over the 80th percentile in achievement bands, as well as reading levels. In addition, they also have the responsibility for student accommodations, from individualized plans to attendance plans to the mental and emotional health supports. This is a lot for our teachers, and providing them supports is going to be the future of success in School District 5. I wanted to make the board and community aware of Act 114, which was passed this summer. The Act 114 is an amendment to the Read to Succeed law that's there. If you can remember, Read to Succeed has a mandatory retention clause for its 3rd graders. These are the 3rd grade performance scores for our district in English Language Arts. What did the Act 114 amendment do? Well, it says that student scoring does not meet this school year are required to be retained unless a good cause exemption is met. Now, there was a good cause exemption last year, but that included a portfolio. The portfolio requirement has now been removed. So with this, that If we had this in place last year, 16,238 third graders would have been under that retention ban. For us, in School District 5, that's 266 third graders. It's now our work is going to be focused heavily on those 266 students, but also students coming up in the first grade and second grade, so that we can do all that we can to mitigate this. But what this means is there's going to be a heavy focus on summer reading programming to ensure that these students actually test. And we're looking at the amount of time that they have before the end of school to where they have to attest at achievement. That's going to put a lot of work on our teachers in summer school. We're looking at 3 weeks, less than 4 weeks, to make those achievement gains on MAP for our most struggling learners in the lowest quartile. And I'll go back again, we're talking about below 21st percentile. So we're going to be working hard. I ask you to just be with and pray with our teachers this year as they try to make these gains. But we will continue to communicate this mandatory retention piece to our communities and our families, because it's much different than what we have gone through. So our focus is on how do we get more time with our students? How do we focus on getting more time summer after school? We can't just rely on this in-school hours time with children to be able to make these huge academic gains, especially in reading. And so we're focused on everything that we can do. If you look at a child's yearly waking hours throughout the year, how much time they're in school versus how much time they're out of school. And our focus as a district has been to look at the things that we can do after school and in the summers for not only academic enrichment, but arts and athletics. And so with that, I wanted to give an update on our community support services. And I'm going to ask former principal that I asked to take the helm of this program and to work on ways that we can get students after school and summer programming help so that we can meet this imperative. So I'm going to ask Mr. Julius Scott to come forward to present his update for community support services. Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Dr. Ross, Madam Chair, and members of the board. I am delighted to stand before you today. It's amazing what the difference a year makes. And I'm going to start off with a book that I devoured at the beginning of this calendar year that's entitled The Gap and the Gain. The basic premise is the gap in the gain. The gap is measuring your current situation against an ideal future that has not yet been reached. We all operate in the gap at times. The gain, however, according to these authors, is measuring your current progress against where you started. So when I think about my journey and our journey as a system, I really want to focus on where we are in comparison to where we started. Before you, board members, I know you have a copy of the impact report that I shared with you, and certainly I'm looking forward to any questions that you may have. For the members in the audience and those that may be watching, a part of that impact report, in essence, outlined the 6 areas that you see above, and specifically identifying achievements for all 6 of those areas, how we articulated those successes, and how it aligns with district initiatives. To that end, that's where we started, because ultimately the goal was to say, as Dr. Ross indicated, that we want to provide wraparound services, and we want to ensure that students have an opportunity to be engaged in high-quality summer and after-school programming. So that's where we started. But I really want to spend some time focusing on where are we going and where are we. So to that end, I have another quote which I think is relevant. If we're going to break the cycle of poverty and change the trajectory of children in our communities, we need to engage every part of society, which includes education, business, government, community organizations, and the solution. And I like to tell people today that a major part of my work is all about cross-sector collaboration, because the reality is there's not much that I can get done without the help of a lot of people that work in our community. So looking ahead, here's where we're going, folks. Dr. Ross and I had a conversation. He said, Julius, when I initially had a conversation with you, my thought was vertical. I was thinking about the start of a child's day to the end of the day. And after a year's time, I will tell you, yes, we should be focused on the start of the day and the end of the day, but that alone won't do it. And so my thought for us in our system is to think about cradle to career outcomes, because that doesn't start at the beginning of the day, it really starts at the beginning of life. So we're focusing our attention to say, how do we begin to focus on what the start of life looks like for kids in our communities until they graduate and beyond? And so you'll see above, there are a total of 6 outcomes that we've developed, and I'm grateful. One of the things that we celebrated is the development of an advisory board. So one of our members is here, community member. And so we had a chance to unpack these this past Friday. The reality is this gives us a strategic plan moving forward, but it also gives us measurable outcomes. So when folks ask, like, what is it that you're doing, we'll be able to focus specifically on those 6 outcomes. Now, the reality in that is that we can't focus on all 6 outcomes immediately. But what I would tell you are 2 primary matters that we feel as an advisory board moving forward. One is addressing kindergarten readiness. So Dr. Ross has been talking about 3rd grade reading scores. Well, we recognize that if we address students before they walk into our building, particularly from certain communities, we give ourselves a major, major advantage for students and families. And then the second part to that is increasing career pathway participation. Because we recognize for many of our students, if we want to see them do well and be contributing members here in Irmo, we have to increase the opportunities that they will have, within the workforce. There are 2 quotes that I want to share with you, and I'll go back to the kindergarten readiness, and so partnerships that I'll share, and then I'll give you an opportunity to ask any questions you may be interested in. But in real time, we have a partnership currently with the Richland County Public Library, and so we've hosted a pop-up 4K bus that comes to Harbison Gardens twice a month. Our very first edition of that for the 2024 school year was literally on August the 30th. We had 10 families to show up. 10 families to show up with children ages 0 to 4. And during that time, they had an opportunity to learn about language, sights, sounds, numbers, you name it. They were also provided books. And we have a family who said to us, prior to this opportunity to work with the school system and the library, we did not own any books for our daughter. 0. She said, we now have at least 20 books in our home, and my daughter will not go to bed without me reading at least 1. Think about that. That is huge. That's huge. So on top of that, we also partner with the parenting services here in our system. And so now when this pop-up 4K van pops up, we'll now have screening in place. And so why is that important? Because now we'll be able to determine, long before kids enter our building, if there are any needs or services that could be provided and that might be made available to families. So again, in an effort to address 3rd grade reading proficiency, folks, our goal is to say we're not waiting until they come into our building, we're taking the action directly to them. So with that being said, I certainly want to open the floor for you all to ask any questions that you may have.
Do we have any questions? Mr. Satterfield.
First, I want to say thank you. I know this is a tough job. I had a couple questions. I saw Ms. Price on the back page on the photo op, and I know that she and Mr. Shield do a lot with readiness, with pre-kindergarten and all that. Are they able to assist you in your efforts and spend a lot of time? I know that they spend a lot of time getting those packets ready and trying to figure out a way of helping kids.
Yeah, so the great part, so I mentioned, cross-sector partnerships, but it's also cross-department partnerships as well. Again, my job is impossible without having other members of our system. And again, I'll point back to these 6 outcomes that we've drafted. The beauty of that is having a small group that I work with for each of those efforts. And so, yes, folks are saying, Julius, tell us what you need. How can we assist? How can we help? So overwhelming support for sure.
Okay, and my second question is one that I'm sure that a situation you're facing, and that is transition with your population turnover? Are you having a tough time with consistency with that, or you find that you've got some stability there with your clients?
There is transition for sure. I'll say one of the beautiful things that's happened recently is we had a chance to meet the president of NHE. NHE is the property managing group for Harbison Gardens. So then also had a meeting with the vice president. And so once they found out about the work that they were doing, or we were doing, they just recognized like this is a win-win for both us as a system, but also for their group, because they recognize that the more effort that we pour into that community, the fill rate will stay high, right? Like if families know that if I move into this community, I will have access to a plethora of options that typically isn't available in a lot of areas. So yes, you do have families that move out for sure, but because of the efforts that we're taking, people do stick around because there are services that are not being offered in other apartment complexes.
Okay, and I had one last thing just to share with you. You know, I'm all about stealing other people's ideas. I worked at one elementary school, and we did prize packs for reading. We would go knock on doors in the evening, and if we could catch the kids reading, then we had prizes, and the businesses would donate these prize packs. And the kids, we had kids that were reading in the bathtub because they didn't want to miss out on getting their prize pack. But it really encouraged the kids to read. Just an idea. I
Yes,
know
sir.
you've probably got a whole list of things that you do to motivate them.
I don't think there could be a shortage. Ultimately, we have to change the perception of what reading is about, right? And I think ultimately we can't have students with the perception that I only read because I'm in school, right? That's a fallacy. People read because they want to learn, because they want to grow, because they're interested in topics. And so that's the mindset that we're seeking to change. That we're not doing this because you're in school. You're doing this because you're a person that will benefit as a reader. One more partnership that we have in place, and again, I have to give kudos to colleagues, is the Dolly Parton Foundation. Are you all familiar with the Dolly Parton Foundation? So the Dolly Parton Foundation provides free books to a child per month until they turn the age of 5. So we now have 25 children who are not yet in our system that we have identified that are already receiving books until they turn 5 years old. So again, I think it's going to be a number of factors that will help us to change the trajectory.
That's a great partnership that you have with them. I don't believe that the Dolly Parton Foundation worked in our area a few years back when my kids were that age. So I think that that's great that you've brought that to, where we live. That's a great program. I saw Ms. Barnhart.
Not a question, but I was just reading on the Young Men United participation and having 7 students getting internships. That's incredible. I want to congratulate you on that.
It is phenomenal. So to that end, I want to go back to our career pathway. So many of you know Mr. Tom Ledbetter, who recently retired from Midlands Technical College. So he's on our advisory board. And our conversation now is, Julius, how can I make a stronger connection between higher ed and what we do in School District 5, specifically for identified students. So you're right. So having 7 students is a great number, but our goal is to increase that number, but also increasing the number of business partners in our community that might be willing to give those opportunities to our young men. So thank you.
Yes, so one question, and I think I know the answer, but we kind of really started off this program targeted at Harbison Gardens, but from what I'm seeing, you're really kind of expanding it, like you said, cradle to career. And in our document is we're doing RFPs for after-school programs at Harbison West and Seven Oaks Elementary. Do you want to maybe expand on
Absolutely,
that?
absolutely. So again, the original goal was to say, let's focus our work around Harbison Gardens, but we also have a federal grant through Magnet Schools of America that I was included in that would provide after school for both Harbison and Seven Oaks. So last year I didn't get a chance to focus as much on Seven Oaks, and this year I realized hey, we got to get the ball rolling.
And I have a follow-up on that. Is that, what age is that range for?
For right now, it's elementary school. Yes, ma'am.
Middle?
Elementary?
Elementary,
Yes, ma'am.
okay. So do we have 4-year-old kindergarten at those 2 schools?
Yes, ma'am.
So do they qualify?
That's
or-
there's a lot to that, to unpack. 4K and after school. And I'm not the most qualified person to speak on that, but I can tell you that is a conversation that
Okay,
that
it
needs to be
definitely
engaged.
applies to 5K.
Yes, ma'am.
And
Yes,
up,
ma'am.
and the summer, it will also be available in the
Yes, ma'am.
summer?
The other piece for us too, and again, I think it's an avenue that hasn't typically been explored between school systems and daycare providers. But the reality is we're not in competition with them, and I don't want them to feel like they're in competition with us. At the end of the day, by having a cradle-to-career outcome and the way we look at that approach is to say we're not competitors. But if you take on our kids, we want to say, how do we work together? So that way, if you have a 4K program, how might we help you to best serve our kids?
All right, and I just want to throw a comment to what you said about the summer internships. That's amazing. That helps our students get jobs. And I don't know if you know this or not, you probably do, that September is now Workforce Development Month. And Tom Ledbetter is probably one of the best advocates that I have ever met, and has worked so well with District 5 and helping kids get jobs and internships. And I think it's amazing that he's involved in all of the things that you're doing. I think you have a great board all over the way around, so good job.
It's a great opportunity. The last thing I'll say, and again, I thank you for the opportunity. We have one of our local law enforcement officials, while I was in a meeting with Tom Ledbetter a couple of weeks ago, wasn't anticipating, but he just abruptly said, whatever you're doing out there, we need you to continue, because we don't get the calls. Sure, things happen, but what we see today versus what we've seen prior to this position, whatever it is that you're doing, keep doing it. So we're definitely making some solid progress. So again, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Scott, we certainly thank you for your journey and your pathway. If you have the opportunity to look through the Community Support Services impact report that we have, it's certainly chock full of a lot of information, but we're seeing those just in year one of implementation, the growth there. And so I'm very proud of that. And so thank you. We know it's going to help us in those areas. When we show that data about the students who are at the lowest quartile, they're in areas based on neighborhoods. And so to be able to go into those communities and provide these wraparound services will help all involved. And so last, I'd like to end with our education materials for the bond referendum. I'm going to starting out with a question. I think as parents, I know in my house, we're always grappling with this question. Are our students or our children, are they prepared for their futures? We are preparing them for a future that's not ours. It's changing each and every day. And are they ready for their futures? We have been putting together a fix and fill plan to address not only the safety issues, but the productivity of the learning environments, basically a transformation of these environments to prepare them for their futures. And so, in accordance with the South Carolina Ethics, Government Accountability, and Campaign Reform Act of 1991, this brochure does not expressly advocate for one position and is for educational and informational purposes only. So we had this reviewed by our bond attorney, as well as submitted to the South Carolina Ethics Commission for their opinion or their approval before we released it. So with that, I'm not going to make too many comments other than to share that our children, their future, your choice information is for the bond referendum is out, including the tax facts and the rezoning options, as well as an outline of the safety-focused projects and the productivity-focused projects that are available. So again, this information is online for the community to review. If there are any questions, we ask them to point them to our website. Again, we'll just kind of leave it there and let the educational materials speak for themselves. But with that, that concludes the superintendent's report, and I stand for any questions.
Do you have any questions? Ms. Huddle.
Dr. Ross, I was just curious, you mentioned at the very beginning, I think, the new letters training for reading education, and I was two questions really. One, what is the required timeline on that we have to get our teachers up to speed? And then my second question is, I think some teachers are already implementing it, and I was curious what kind of feedback we're getting.
Let Ms. McCaskill will speak to those.
So this is the last year for our cohort to start with the state, and we're in that cohort. We had one school that started 2 years ago with letters, but our other 12 schools have started this fall. I have personally completed the 2-year requirement already, so at least I do know what they're doing, and I understand what they're doing. But we have started in the fall, and we will finish it in 2 years' time. It's all for all kindergarten through 3rd grade teachers. We do have some teachers, mostly our coaches at this point, reading coaches that have completed the full 2 years. We have several teachers, can't give you the exact number, but we have several teachers at the one school that had completed it prior that are in their 2nd year of implementation of that. So what we're seeing right now is the focus of phonics. Truly that's what we're seeing right now, is that the eye-opening of, we've always known phonics was important. That's always been important. But the methodical, intentional teaching of phonics is what we're seeing, and teachers are enjoying learning about the brain research. That's what you start out with. The whole first unit is all about the brain research of how reading is processed in your brain. And I've heard really great, which I've always said, the first unit, if you get through the first unit, you're great. But they're excited about the first unit, so that's good for me. Like, I love that, because that's the one unit that was a little difficult to get through, but they're excited about it. Because after the unit 1, that's when you get into, okay, I can learn this, I go in the classroom, and I can do it tomorrow. But we'll finish this in 2 years. Our SAVIS, which is the program that we adopted this year, goes right along with our letters training, so the pieces and parts from that word study is directly aligned to letters as well. So I'm very excited about what this can do for our youngest readers. I do feel that was a little missing piece of our curriculum, and this gives us very methodical ways and strategic ways to teach that.
I have a question, kind of on the same subject about the new SC Ready law in 3rd grade. And I know this, the slide shows that last year there was 266 3rd graders that would not have met the requirements. And I totally support and get all of the, the chart with the hours in the day and all of the after-school programs and summer school programs and summer supports and things like that. But during the school year, as they're preparing to take SC Ready, as the students are preparing to take SC Ready, I'm sure that we've identified who are the, coming in from 2nd grade to 3rd grade are most at risk during the school year. What are we doing during, and we might not be able to. I mean, this is spread out, the 266 students are spread out through all of our school, or, all of our elementary schools, in different circumstances, and I get all of that. But are we doing anything intentional during the school day to, like, pull-outs or things that don't disrupt the rest of the academic day? I mean, I guess in some way they can, but what are we doing that's intentional, targeted towards those students, that 20% of students, to help them get ready for that test? Because I know that they're talking about it. I have a 3rd grader, and she talks about SC Ready, and, so I know that this, does that make sense?
Absolutely.
I know I'm rambling,
I think I can answer for you. Every school is given 2 reading interventionists, and then our Title I schools use their Title I funds to increase the number of interventionists. Some have 3, some have 4, depending on what they choose to spend their funds with. But those interventionists pull students based on low reading ability and at-risk students. And so we use FastBridge, which is another screening program. We use that with all kindergarten and 1st grade students, but we also use it with our at-risk 2nd grade students as well, which that also gives us more detailed information really about word study and those very beginning phonetic concerns that we might have for students. That's where we target students. We also serve students in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, but we really pay attention to our youngest learners as well. Those students in 3rd grade that are identified as being at risk at this point, they are definitely receiving that intervention service. Some schools have too many students that the teachers can't all be pulled out, but we focus on our lowest students that need the assistance. And then within the classroom itself, we have what's called a what I need time or a core intervention time, depending on which school as to what they call it. But that's a time where teachers really pinpoint, they look at MAP scores, they look at what the student needs, and they're working directly in small groups with those students. Small groups happen in elementary schools kind of throughout the day, but those periods of time, it's very targeted, specific for students.
So you mentioned that you have reading interventionalists at each school, and that there's some schools where there's too many students to be able to effectively utilize the reading interventionalists. Are those requests that are made that would get to us for additional positions? And that might be a Dr. Ross question, I'm not sure, but, as we're looking at, what kind of support we can provide during the day. Like I said, I'm totally in support of, I understand the full day, but what we really control is what happens inside the building. So when we're talking about additional, and it may be that the bodies are not there for the positions.
Well, that's what I was about to say. So there is requests for that. That does come, requests do come, and then you look at the whole budget overall. Sometimes there's no funding really for those extra bodies, plus we need to make sure that our classrooms have teachers before we have the extras that are pull-out teachers as well. So yes, there's a balance there. We just have to remember, once you start adding interventionists, you can't say I'm going to add interventionists to another school but not do it equally, because then you get into a Title I issue of supplanting. So you got to be careful. It has to be, you're going to add one to every school. So then you're adding 13 FTEs when you do that.
Right. I'm
Does
just
that
saying,
make
like, when you're
sense?
looking at the budget and you're looking at, I'm not saying that we can afford to do that, but we might be able to if there's excess money somewhere or whatever. I'm just wondering, Dr. Ross, if that's coming to our level where we see all of those positions, because I could be wrong, and if I am wrong, I am sure somebody's going to tell me, and that's okay. But I don't see a school saying that they have too many instructors in a building. I don't see any one of our schools saying that. So if there's a way to support that, I would just hope that it would come to us if that is,
And we
I'm not
certainly
the number
appreciate-
magician like Ms. Tucker, so, I don't know, but I just would want to make sure that we're,
And these are things we're talking about when we come to the 45th day. We take all of our requests, and we look at budget amendment to see, or where can we prioritize. Our district has enjoyed about $7.2 million a year for the last 3 years that we won't have moving forward. And so we're really looking at, okay, how do we maintain our base program as well as the interventions? One of the blessings that we do have is our Title I, and that's kind of where you see it heavily concentrated in those Title I schools. So they come with money. However, we see the benefits at all of our schools, even our non-Title I. So when we give them an FTE, then as Ms. McCaskill says, we can't supplant. So now we have to go back to Title I and give them extra. So every time we increase that, we must make sure we not supplant. But I think the goal is to think creatively about how we get these wraparound services during the day as well as after school around those most critical need learners. And so it's multifaceted. One of the things, talking to Mr. Scott, and he said, as a elementary school principal, now seeing on this side the importance of extending the day. Because it's basically saying, while I have them, I can extend that day to get a little bit more time. And so high quality after school is really about the minutes. I think one thing, and I'll silence on this, is we really look at, we don't have 180 days of instruction before that third grade test. And standing before you is somebody who was retained in the 3rd grade. So this is very, very personal to me. I had to spend 2 years in the 3rd grade. But you have 150 days to get it because that's when we start testing. So that really puts the pressure high on that teacher where we reduce the amount of time because we don't have the full 180 days. And so really any way we can find to extend that time so that they can meet math, they can meet ELA, the reading and writing portion, as well as their science. So great question. One of the things that we will be bringing for the board, specifically as a budget amendment, is how do we look at, because we're going to be required with Read to Succeed to finance all of these summer reading campers, which will be a major add. So that's as required by law. So that's going to be the first piece, and then looking at other interventions.
Mr. Satterfield.
Yeah, I had a question from Ms. McCaskill. Ms. McCaskill, this Read to Succeed, I mean, is this for ESOL students? Do they have to be tested? Does this include special education students?
So there are some good cause exemptions, and so for your ML students, or your multilingual students, if they have not had 2 years within the United States with services, so if they're within the 2 years, then that would be a good cause exemption for them. They would not have to be retained. For special ed students, if they have had 2 years of a reading goal on their IEP, that's a good cause exemption for them. So I will say, though, and I've explained this to Dr. Ross as well, but the special ed piece of it is a little difficult because kindergarten in and of itself is an intervention. So we don't typically test students for special education in kindergarten. There are some exceptions to that rule, but typically we don't. 1st grade, we're still learning to read, so we're giving them a chance. We typically don't start testing till the end of 1st grade, beginning of 2nd grade. So if they have to have 2 full years of reading goals on their IEP by 3rd grade, it's very, very difficult, and I'll be honest, this is a Tina opinion, but I'm not all about just saying, let's test a child to see if they're special ed really early in their career, because it's just not developmentally appropriate. Yeah. So we need to make sure that we're giving them the opportunity not to have to be a special ed student.
Yeah, and I think it's unfortunate. I know that you were asking Ms. Hines about pulling kids out. Unfortunately, 3rd grade is when they add more subject areas for the teachers to teach, so there's not as much flexibility, so to speak. Is there a benchmark that they have to reach before they leave 3rd grade? I mean, can you stay in 3rd grade twice?
You can stay in 3rd grade twice. So there is a benchmark that they have to reach. If we were looking at MAP scores last year, I guess for the 24 year, they had to make a MAP score of 177 to actually get promoted out of summer reading camp. That will be higher this year because that does not meet 1. Now that it is inclusive of all does not meet, that will be higher. We've not been told what that is, but just looking at percentiles it's going to be somewhere in the neighborhood probably of around 185, 187, somewhere in there. But again, that's Mr. Giuliano and I looking at that chart, trying to figure out exactly what we think it's going to be, so the state will come out and tell us what that's going to be.
Well, I know that schools, and that's the reason I asked Dr. Scott over there about what sort of turnover he has that he's dealing with. And some of our schools have such great turnover. They turn over 35, 40% of kids sometimes. And so it's a daunting task there to meet this benchmark if it's the determining factor whether they get to go to 4th grade or not. So you couple that with the other thing. So I'm like Ms. Hines, if there's something, when you all start thinking outside the box, if there's something that we as a board can do, talking with your reading interventionists and your principals and your teachers, please bring it to us so we can help them.
Well, I was actually going to follow up with Dr. Ross's comment. The new law gives us some flexibility with summer reading camp, and we are playing with the box right now to see how far outside of it we can get. Because what it says is we have to give at-risk students 96 hours of additional instruction. It can start during the school year. So we do identify students at the latest. Now, we do it long before this, but at the latest, the law says by January of the child's third grade year, parents have to have a parent conference to say the child is at risk, you know, they may have to go to summer reading camp, all of this. So we do have a list of students by January at the latest. So we're trying to think through how we could do some after-school additional assistance then, and then add on some summer help as well, but begin adding those hours up early so that it is before the test rather than after the test. But there's a lot of details of that will have to be worked out. Yes, we'll probably have to come to you and ask for some assistance with that as well. But we are trying to think through, the summer reading camp is just not going to take a child that's below 177 and get them to 180 or above. It's just not. I mean, the 3 or 4 weeks of instruction's not where it's going to happen. It has to happen throughout the school year. So we're trying to figure out how that might look.
Mr. Scully.
Yeah, I guess, if I understood you correctly about the staffing, if you add at one school, then because of Title I, you have to add over here too. Could you hire them perhaps at the district level and say they work for you and be kind of like a jump team that roams through the district and goes and addresses individual schools as needed? Is that a possibility, or would there still be an issue?
We would just have to make sure it's, even though we would send them out, we would have to send them out with intentions of balancing Title I and non-Title I. It would have to be balanced with how we send them out.
Okay, I see. And let me ask you this, kind of following up on the theme about, your needs. I would love to see what a path to zero would look like. I know we're at 266 is probably not your goal. So kind of agreeing that zero would be the goal, and I know that's stated, but what's your target? Obviously, we can agree that it's zero, but what's your next target? Because that may or may not be realistic. What number does it look like that you would feel like you're having success at that?
So I can't give you the number off the top of my head, but what I can tell you is that this, we do a reading plan. So we do a reading plan every year, and what our goal is to reduce it by 1% every year is what our plan states. We have been getting to that, so we have been successful with that. Barely, but we have. So I don't know how many students specifically that is off the top of my head, but that has been our goal.
Okay, well, I'd very much be interested in seeing, like, what a pathway, what would it look like for you to reach whatever your goal is? What would that look like, and what would it entail? As far as the board's concerned, what we could help with, so.
Thank you.
All right, anyone else? Dr. Ross. I guess that concludes your report. All right.